All right, welcome back to our deep dive into the 12 principles of project management. Today, we are tackling principle number 7, tailor based on context. And let me tell you, this isn't just another rule to memorize. This one is a total game changer, one of the most powerful and practical principles you'll ever use, both on the PMP exam and out there in the real world. It's all about one simple idea, adapting your game plan to fit what the project actually needs. So, first up, let's talk about what I call the context-driven blueprint. This is where we're going to lay the foundation and really get to the heart of what tailoring means and why it's so incredibly important. Think of this as our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to walk through 4 key pillars. First, we'll hit the mandate. What does this principle actually say? Then we'll get into the exam reality, which is all about why tailoring is mission critical for you to pass the PMP. After that, we'll look at the control board, where we'll dig into the real-world variables you've got to manage. And finally, we'll wrap with the execution strategy, your personal framework for absolutely nailing those tricky situational questions on the exam. At its heart, the principle is as simple as it sounds: tailor based on context. But what does that really mean in practice? Well, it means that as project managers, we have to consciously, deliberately adapt everything. I'm talking our processes, our tools, our governance, even how we lead our teams to fit the specific DNA of each project. We are throwing that rigid, one-size-fits-all playbook right out the window. Now, here's why this is so huge for the exam. Tailoring is literally the connective tissue of the PMP. It sits right at the crossroads of 2 massive domains: the process domain, which, is a whopping 41% of the exam, and the business environment domain, another 26%. The exam is basically testing a mindset, and that mindset is one size does not fit all. It's also testing your timing. You got to start tailoring early. Most importantly, you're going to see this pop up again and again in those situational questions where you have to pick the right delivery approach. All right, so we've got the what and the why down. Now for the fun part, the how. Let's get tactical and dive into how you actually start calibrating all the different variables. A great project manager is kind of like a sound engineer at a mixing board, constantly adjusting all these different sliders to get the perfect sound. You have to be assessing things like the project's size, its complexity, and the risk involved. Is this a small internal project, or is it a massive, high-stakes public launch? What about the industry? Are there heavy regulations? What's the stakeholder culture like? How experienced is your team? You're looking at everything and dialing in that perfect mix for your specific project. So once you've sized up all those variables, it's time to start pulling the right strategic levers. And this is where the rubber meets the road. On the left, you see that assessment isn't a one-and-done thing. It's a continuous engine. You have to constantly recalibrate. And on the right, those are the tactical levers you can pull. Things like adjusting your delivery approach, maybe fine-tuning your governance and reporting, or scaling processes up or down. This is tailoring in action. Okay, let's shift gears. This is all great in theory, but how do you actually use this to pass the PMP? This next section is all about building your personal execution strategy for those exam questions. Pay close attention here, because this table is absolutely crucial. This is where a lot of people trip up. On the left, you've got the common distractors, those answer choices that sound good but are dead wrong. Things like rigidly following the standard PMO methodology. But on the right, you have the PMP reality, the correct mindset, which is all about adapting PMO guidelines to fit the project. Another classic trap is confusing tailoring with just skipping processes. Nope, the reality is that you intentionally scale them while keeping your governance strong. Seriously, study this slide. It's a goldmine. Think of this guide as your cheat sheet for exam questions. Your job is to become a detective and look for clues in the question itself. If you see phrases like highly regulated industry or clear upfront requirements, your brain should immediately start leaning towards a predictive approach. But if you see stuff like rapidly changing requirements or high uncertainty, that's a massive flashing sign pointing you towards an agile or hybrid answer. And that pro tip on the slide? That's your secret weapon. Let the environment described in the question dictate your answer choice. So, when you get one of those classic, what should the project manager do first questions, you're going to use this 4-step protocol. It's simple. Step 1, assess the project's context. Step 2, identify what the best foundational delivery approach is. Step 3, tailor the specific processes and tools you need to fit that reality. And step 4, always remember to continuously review and adjust. This is your repeatable framework for getting to the right answer every single time. Okay, let's pull it all together and wrap this up, because really, this principle isn't just a technique for an exam. It's a core professional philosophy. This is about adopting the effective PM mindset. And this quote right here, it just nails it. Effective project management is not about forcing projects into a rigid mold. It is the ability to deliver the right solution in the right way for each unique environment. That's it. That's the key takeaway. This is the mindset that separates the checklist followers from the true project leaders. It's about being an adaptable, sharp, context-aware leader. And this whole idea of tailoring flows perfectly into our next topic. Coming up, we're going to be diving into principle number 8, build quality into processes and deliverables. We're going to explore that critical shift from just inspecting for mistakes at the end to actually preventing them from the very start. At the end of the day, that ability to tailor based on context is what makes a project manager truly great. If this explainer helped you get a better handle on it, do me a favor and support the series by hitting that like button. And of course, subscribe with notifications on so you don't miss a single part of our 2026 PMP series. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Learning reinforcement.
If you analyze the breakdown of the 2026 PMP exam, you find two primary areas of focus: the process domain at 41% and the business environment domain at 26%. When those two heavily tested domains intersect, they create a specific testing zone that controls a massive portion of your final score. That overlapping center zone is governed by Principle 7, tailor based on context. The exam directly tests how well you navigate the exact point where environmental realities dictate procedural rules. The Project Management Institute states this principle verbatim. You must intentionally adapt your project management approach, including your processes, tools, governance, and leadership style, based on the specific characteristics of the project, the environment, and the stakeholders. This requires abandoning the habit of forcing every project into a standardized methodology. A strict one-size-fits-all approach guarantees inefficiency and leads to wrong answers on situational test questions. Because this principle anchors 67% of the exam's combined weight, proficiency in this specific intersection is a primary requirement for a passing score in both the process and business environment domains. The baseline expectation of the 2026 exam is that standard corporate methodologies must be actively dismantled and rebuilt for every unique project you undertake. The 2026 exam framework treats tailoring as a proactive, structural requirement performed at the project's inception. The exam enforces a strict chronology here. You must complete your tailoring assessment before any detailed planning begins. You cannot write a schedule or a budget until you establish the framework you are building them on. To navigate situational questions effectively, you need a strategy that maps contextual inputs to predictable, correct answers. Specific rules govern this process, making tailoring a systematic function of project management, driven by specific inputs. This 6-axis radar chart tracks variables dictating your delivery approach. First, project size, complexity, and regulatory environment. Heavy oversight requires different rules than internal updates. Next, measure stakeholder needs and team maturity. Finally, assess the work environment and your organization's capability to support these methods. If your team is entirely virtual, that choice explicitly dictates your communication and collaboration tool selection. You cannot apply in-person daily stand-ups to a globally distributed workforce without severe modification. Likewise, your team's maturity establishes the absolute baseline threshold for integrating Agile practices. You cannot run advanced Agile frameworks with a team that lacks the experience to self-manage. Ignoring any single one of these 6 essential variables compromises the project's structural integrity before it even begins. Once you assess contextual variables, map them to a definitive project framework on this delivery continuum scale. Heavy regulatory constraints force the approach left toward a strictly predictive framework. Conversely, rapidly changing requirements demand an agile or hybrid adaptation to survive the uncertainty. A hybrid approach is an engineered blending of practices designed specifically for conflicting variable inputs. It allows you to maintain strict budget controls while iteratively developing the product. This calculated translation from raw variables into a delivery approach ultimately dictates every subsequent governance decision you make. Once the framework is set, you execute tactical tailoring. You adjust specific meeting structures, strict documentation requirements, and risk management protocols to match the chosen delivery method. For high-complexity, high-risk projects, you scale processes up.
building deep hierarchical reporting and formal approval gates to protect the organization. For small internal initiatives, you run the inverse process. You intentionally strip away bureaucratic layers, scaling down to a single, streamlined loop. You apply the same logic to communication. You must recalibrate your messaging style to align with different stakeholder cultures, rather than forcing them to adapt to yours. Optimal governance is always strictly proportional to risk and complexity. It is almost never dictated by organizational habit. On the exam, PMI intentionally uses common professional failures as psychological traps. These are the distractors built into the multiple choice options. The first trap is the urge to blindly apply standard methodology without a contextual review. If an answer suggests skipping the assessment, it is wrong. The second trap is confusing legitimate tailoring with skipping essential risk processes to save time. Tailoring optimizes safety. It absolutely does not eliminate it. The third trap involves forcing full, uncompromising agile frameworks onto highly regulated, restrictive projects where flexibility is legally impossible. The fourth trap is recommending a methodology that completely ignores the organization's actual financial or cultural capability to support it. Seasoned project managers frequently fail the business environment domain because they rely on flawed corporate habits from their daily jobs instead of applying contextual analysis. When an exam question presents an ambiguous scenario and asks, "What should the project manager do first?" you need a reliable algorithmic strategy. Here is the decision tree. Step 1. Execute a strict assessment of project inputs and environment. Step 2. Identify the delivery approach, predictive, agile, or hybrid. Step 3. Tactically tailor specific processes to execute that approach. Step 4. Continuously review and calibrate as variables change. Specific descriptors in the question stem, like highly regulated or rapidly changing, indicate the correct path through this decision tree. Rigidly following this exact chronological sequence is your ultimate defensive strategy against exam distractors. A project manager's effectiveness is defined exclusively by their ability to deliver the right solution dictated by context, not by personal preference. You must permanently abandon the rigid mold of standardized project management to successfully lead teams in modern environments. In Episode 8, we apply this mindset to Principle 8, build quality into processes and deliverables. We cover the tactical shift away from inspecting defects at the end of a project, moving toward proactive quality integration from the start. Subscribe and turn on notifications to ensure your complete mastery of the 2026 PMP exam strategy. Thank you for watching, and see you in Episode 8.